with effort level / intensity, whether you've got 100 pounds on that bench press or 200 pounds on that bench press, the effort needs to be the same every time.
Mm-hmm.
So that's where I think the confusion is like, but wait, it's not as heavy, so I don't have to put in as much effort. Wrong. The effort comes with how focused am I being in doing this particular movement, right? So again, if I might have lighter weight on, so going back to the like more reps versus less reps to get to that at or near failure point. Like if I decide I'm doing 25 reps, or I'm doing 10 reps, those reps need to look and be performed the same, with the same intention, the same intensity. The loads are going to be different, but you need to be putting in this, everything needs to look the same in order to get that result that we see happening in the quote unquote research that's out there. And
yeah,
I think
so it's not just like moving the bar through space just to get the repetitions done.
No. And there's factors that would limit people on those two different tracks, right? The person's going low reps, higher weight versus lower weight, higher reps. And those things play into going back into those other components like, well, what kind of capacity do you have to maintain this? You know, like from an energy system perspective, right? Like it may be that I can take a client through 3 sets of 25. Well, that's going to take us a little bit longer to get through, right? So what do I have to take off the table in terms of the total work, the total exercise selection that I with all the things that I need to get done for them or want to get done for them in 2 or 3 times per week, so to speak. Or maybe they are working out 5 days a week, right? And now we're going really high volume. And how does that impact them, right? Can they maintain that intention and that intensity for 25 total repetitions without gassing out, right? Without losing their mental focus, right? Do they have the intestinal fortitude and the mental grit, right? To get through that with that type of intention and intensity so that my last 10 reps, right, feel as the RPE on that feels the same as the last 2 reps on my set of 10, so to speak. And I think the answer to that question is for most people, they cannot do that. They don't have it in them.
Well, and this is where I think sometimes data, can be misleading because yes, in theory, if you're controlled and you have good mechanics and good range of motion, all these variables are controlled. Yes, you can stimulate muscle growth with 25 reps, but to be able to, with that amount, there's the percentages of variance that can occur in there from the variance in the rep quality to the load. Like that's hard to figure out. There's a reason that a lot of times with hypertrophy, it's kind of easy to figure out generally like in your 6 to 12 because it's a good range that's heavy enough to figure out, but also enough volume that you're not just having to put get to near failure on 1 rep, right? And I think another thing to define, when we're going back to RPE, is for you to really start to feel what RPE is, even if you're, it's good to have a rep range that your goal is in a block, but if you're trying to be stuck on, I'm trying to hit a 3x10 and you are trying to hit that with an RPE 8, right? But you don't ever actually perceive what failure feels like with maintaining good mechanics and good range of motion in the same rest times, you're not going to be able to actually regulate what your RPE 8 is. So I think that's also for a lot of people is learning to like a little bit over test the waters or overreach a little bit and know like, hey, okay, I actually worked up to 80 pounds and I could only get 8. And that's where I felt like was near my failure. So maybe my RPE 8 is actually 80 pounds for whatever 7, right? Based off of my exertion. I need to sometimes feel what that feels like so that now in this rest of this progressive block, now I can try to figure out what working at actual RPE 8 is at that load. But if I just stop at I got my 3x10 check at 70 pounds, but that's not actually RPE 8 because you don't actually know what the RPE 10 feels like. And so I think trying to find what that feels like. And again, I'm going to go back to when we're trying to push progression and effort and intensity to have a specific stimulus, the main theory is you need to control the other variables. And I'm going to keep saying that again, because if you get to your 10, but now all these other things you're losing those mechanics, then you're not actually getting to that 10 at the RPE 8 or at a progressive stimulus.
Yeah, I would call that you're violating some basic principles that make it very, very tough to find what correct is for you, right? And again, when you start adding the extra variables, and those variables could be additional sets, variables could be additional reps, it could be additional rest time. you mentioned something there about like when things start to break down, and that will look different in these different, whatever your focus is. Again, strength and hypertrophy, maybe it's the mechanics, right? We're trying to put as much mechanical attention through the load to at or near failure in that. And so that could break down. When you start to move into power, speed and power, it's when we're looking at mechanics, we're looking at bar speed, velocities, right? Like when those break down, now we know we're reaching the ends, right? Those things are a little tougher to manage, and especially if you're not familiar, right? And sometimes devices and technology can help you with that. So if you don't have that available to you, and you're not really in tune with all this stuff, like this is where those variables change. And then when you get into your capacity, programming, like, where am I in my zones here? How much do I have left in the tank before I spill into upper zones 4 and into zone 5 when everything kind of falls apart? And I just simply don't have, right, the gas in the tank, the fuel in the tank to continue to do what I'm doing. And those are so bringing it all the way back to the strength and hypertrophy side of things, like in order for you to be working at that RPE, you need to know what level 10, more specifically, you need to know what like level 11 is, right? On the scale of 1 to 10. You have to go to failure. And I think this is a real challenge for people that are kind of like in the beginning stages in their first 1 to 2 years as they're figuring things out, because they're getting some pretty, if you're being consistent, right? Even if you're not paying attention to any of this stuff and you're just going in and lifting heavy stuff, you're probably seeing a fairly good result, right? I'm putting on some muscle. I'm getting stronger. My capacity is starting to build a little bit here. Like I can handle more, right? That's just, and again, going back to your like 6 to 12 range, like we use that because we know it works, and it allows us to get the volume of all these other things that we want to get done, right? Make sure we get our arms, make sure we get our calves, our abs, all that stuff done, right? In that 1 to, that 60 to 90 minute workout or whatever. Like that's just it's a good formula, and we know it works as so long as it's continually being progressed, right? And again, we're managing these variables. So I think testing it is important. And that I think is really tough for people because, again, when you're testing something, you need to be paying attention to all of the variables. And you mentioned something off air before we started, and that was, if you're not familiar with this, you're kind of getting into like, you're trying to build that muscle and you're trying to build that strength. And you've got a program sitting in front of you and it's got the 3x8 or the 3x10, type of rep and set schemes that 90% of programs have. Again, that is a good rep and set scheme if managed well for that type of result or adaptation. However, it'll work until it doesn't, right? And it's not the program that's not working. It's not the rep and set scheme that's not working. It's how it's being applied, right? How are you applying the thing inside that rep and set scheme? And so I think for some people it would be advantageous for them, going back to your overreaching, to get out of that for a minute, right? And go to something like, well, I'm going to see how many reps I can do in a 3-rep maximum, right? So you're not pushing the 1-rep maximum load. I like 3-rep maxes because I think people can get their head around it, right? They're like, okay, well, I know this is heavier, right? And I'm going to put something on there that I can maybe get 3 with. And maybe they overreached a little bit. They got 1. Like, all right, that was a little bit heavy. But that gets you closer, right? You're getting a little closer. Or they put a little bit more weight on. They got 3. Like, oh, well, I have more than that left in there. And so they put a little bit more on. They put some change plates on the bar, right? And they get under that bar again. And they do it again. And they get to 3 again. Like, oh, well, I have a little bit more, right? And so my point is you have to figure that out till you get to the point where it's like, okay, that isn't moving. Like I don't have that in me, or my 3-rep max, I was only able to get 1. Well, now you maybe need to peel a little bit off. That takes time and patience, and it can't be done every week,